Pass it off to our moderator, Tammie.
Good evening, everyone. We have a wonderful group tonight. Thank you all for joining us. Again, my name is Tammie King-Johnson. I'm with Mercy Health, and I oversee the House of Mercy Homeless Center. Talking about the lasting effects of eviction, a lot of information, good information will be coming your way this evening. But before we get to our presenters, we want to share a little video with you that really depicts the traumatic effect that families and individuals have when they experience eviction. And so we're going to watch a video called The Invisibles next.
Sheriff's office! Sheriff's office!
I took an oath when I took the job, and when I get a paper from the judge that says I have to evict this person, and then I have to go and do what the judge says. Do I like it? No. You know, we all have to pay our bills. Some have a little more hardships than others, but based on my job and my oath and what I have to do, I do it. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Secure the door. We're now done.
Well, the eviction process is very cruel. And I mean, some people make their own bed, but some people are products of society. I couldn't work anymore. But it's a little bit late now. My life is over. I cannot do this. I cannot sleep in the cold. I mean, there's nothing I can do. I'm 59 years old. I can't live on the street. I'm not the type. I'm gonna have to figure out some way of putting an end to this life.
We missed 2 payments because my husband lost his job, which made us behind. And I'm a college student with a high-risk pregnancy, and they're giving us 48 hours to move out. We have called the Salvation Army, but they don't have any openings, and his family doesn't live in Oklahoma, and I'm not allowed to live with my father because of a certain thing that happened a long time ago. He's not allowed to be around kids. So we are going to be living, 4 kids and 2 adults in my little car because we don't have anywhere to go. Well, I hope I don't have a miscarriage. I feel bad for my kids. I don't know what to tell them. I don't know where we're going to take our showers. And this is like the first time we've ever had any of this situation, and it just sucks. I just hope you don't ever have any bad times happen. Hope life doesn't happen, I guess.
It's sad. What do we as a society do to help them? But that's why they become invisible. They don't know where to turn. They don't know what to do, and their options are so limited once they get into this eviction cycle. But it's a piece of the puzzle that's creating all these social and cultural and economic problems. I think a vast number of our brothers and sisters are facing every day in this community and throughout the state. This can be fixed. I mean, it can be made better, and other states have done that.
Children's always a hard thing. When you walk into a bedroom and you see a crib and you see baby toys, and there's a child involved there somewhere. There has been cases where the elderly that didn't even know. I mean, their dementia set in, and different problems were that you have to deal with everything in a different way. You can't be totally heartless. You will have to forcibly take them out of the apartment. If they won't leave, your only recourse is, place them under arrest, which we try not to do that. Usually you can reason with people because they do not want to go to jail. And we don't want to take them to jail, not for an eviction. Their life's already, turned upside down anyway.
Just trying to get as much stuff as I can out before they lock it up. I owe a bank and I owe another bank, and I haven't been able to continuously pay them on time, so they started garnishing my checks. Basically left my last 2 checks very short, very short, that way I can't pay rent or pay late fees or anything else really. So right now we just moving with my grandma and just gonna try to just pay up all our bills, and hopefully we get a chance to move back in if I get them paid up, or try to find another place, which won't be easy with evictions on there, on your record or anything. So it's just a terrible thing to even have to be put out with kids and everything like that. So I mean, they pretty smart kids. They can tell. They actually help pack up most of the stuff, so it's just the way it is, I guess.
All right, that was heartbreaking. Although the video, The Invisibles, was shot in Oklahoma, this is what it looks like for those experiencing eviction across the country, including in our community in Rock County. Next, I would like to present my good friend, Michael Basford from the State of Wisconsin Interagency Council on Homelessness. Michael's going to share with us what those eviction numbers look like in Rock County and across the state of Wisconsin. Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tammie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm really, it's an honor to be here and to present this information, and to see so many people in the community take such a great interest in this, to see such a large crowd. So my name is Michael Basford. I'm the director for the State of Wisconsin Interagency Council on Homelessness. I've had this job since May of 2019, when I was appointed to it by Governor Evers. And I just want to give you, I'm just going to start off by a little bit of a brief explanation about what the council is, and about the Wisconsin Eviction Data Project, from which we're going to be taking a look at some data this evening. The Interagency Council on Homelessness has been in effect since 2017. It has a very wide bipartisan support at the Capitol, and what we do, it's chaired by Governor Evers, and it's also made up by 8 department secretaries and 4 representatives from each of the federally recognized continuum of care throughout Wisconsin. And our job is to really dive deep into the issue of homelessness, to come up with strategies to fight that in the state and to get people into housing, and then to also look at all of the different data points and to find ways in which we can get a better understanding of the situation. And that's where the Wisconsin Eviction Data Project came into effect. We started it in right toward the end of 2019, had to put it on hold as we pivoted toward responding to the pandemic. But we picked it up again toward the end of last year. The website and the public facing data is not available yet. we expect within the next couple of weeks we'll be launching that site. What we really wanted to do was to not exactly replicate the efforts of Princeton University and Eviction Labs and the Milwaukee project that the Wisconsin School of Medicine does for the city of Milwaukee on Milwaukee evictions. What we wanted to do was provide a broad picture for people to be able to know how many filings for eviction and how many judgments for eviction are happening in each county every month. And so we'll be able to, on a monthly basis, update those numbers so we can take a look at trends, take a look at what areas of the state have different issues than the other. And we will, and hopefully use that data to make some good policy. So if we can have the next slide, please. So one of the things I'd like to show you this evening is this is the state of Wisconsin eviction filings and judgments for 2019 through the end of March last year. I'd like to start with the top line, the kind of the lime green line. That is the number of filings for eviction in Wisconsin in 2019. So that's kind of a baseline that you can take a look at and see just kind of what our trends are under normal circumstances. The dark red line, of course, is an abnormal circumstance, which was all of 2020. It started out with the number of eviction filings being fairly high. And then when the pandemic happened and toward the end of March, Governor Evers issued Emergency Order 15, which was a moratorium on evictions for not being able to pay rent. In Wisconsin, you saw those numbers dramatically drop down in April and then in May. And then when the 60-day moratorium ended, just as the Wisconsin Rental Assistance Program, RAP, which put out $35 million to help people pay their rents that were being affected by the economic downturn. Once June happened, you saw an enormous spike in eviction filings. And then as the RAP program got money out there, the number of eviction filings tapered down. And then in September is when the CDC's moratorium, which is still ongoing, started. And those numbers then as you can see, then continue into this year. The moratorium is, the CDC moratorium will be ending in June. But at the same time, we also are standing up a new Emergency Rental Assistance Program, WERA, that is putting a lot more federal funds out there, about $300 million plus. Will be going out the door to help people pay back rents, to keep folks out of eviction court, so that they can keep out of the homelessness system. And so far, as you can see, the eviction moratorium is keeping the number of evictions in Wisconsin down, and compared to what would normally be happening. So that's very good. And let's go to the next slide then, please. And so what we have on this screen, I have, so we have Rock County listed with a number of similar sized and larger counties. And I just wanted to point out a few things that would be very, very, that I think you'd find very interesting. If you take a look at Rock County's numbers, Rock County is about a little more than 1/4 of the size of Dane County. I want you to keep that in mind as we take a look at some of these columns. You have the number of filings. There were 549 filings for eviction in Rock County last year, 101 judgments for eviction. The next column is the percentage of judgments to filings. So that means 18% of 18.4% of the filings for eviction resulted in judgments. And if you take a look, that's a bit higher than the statewide average, and that there are some counties that keep that percentage of judgments to filings down low, like Dane and Milwaukee counties, as you could see. The next column then being the population to 2020 filings. So in Rock County, what that number means is that for every 295 residents of Rock County, there was an eviction filing. That number is pretty close to the statewide average, but as you can see, that number is fairly on the low side compared to a lot of other similarly sized counties. And then the last column being the population to 2020 judgments, and that means in Rock County, 1,600 for every 1,605 residents, there was an eviction judgment. And that number is substantially lower than the statewide average. It is much lower than if you take a look at Waukesha and Dane counties. And that's something to really keep in mind. I mean, there are, if you live in Rock County and you have an eviction filing, you are much more likely to receive a judgment for eviction than a lot of other counties. Again, compared to Dane County, about 1/4 of the population of Dane County, but there was only about a half of the number of 2020 filings for evictions. And then in Rock County had more evictions than judgments than Dane County throughout last year. So that's that is something that folks should really be concerned about. And let's go then to the last of my slides. We now have, or we're able to break down the eviction data into zip code areas. And as you can see here, the overwhelming majority of evictions are happening in Beloit and Janesville. But if you look at, if you consider this, though, that Beloit, at a population of 36,836, is 57% the size of the population for Janesville at 64,245. But Beloit has 73% of the filings of Janesville and 78% the number of eviction judgments. So what that tells me is that a renter in Beloit is more likely to receive a filing for eviction and a judgment for eviction than a renter in Janesville. And that comes to the end of the data that I've presented.
Thank you, Michael. A quick reminder, if you have questions, and I'm sure you all have questions for Michael, please put those questions in the chat box. You may also direct anonymous questions my way to Tammie King-Johnson. Our next presenter will be Korey Lundin from the Legal Action of Wisconsin. Korey's going to talk with us tonight about the challenges that individuals and families face when they have to try to navigate eviction through the judicial system. Korey, welcome.
Thanks, Tammie. My name is Korey Lundin. I'm an attorney with Legal Action of Wisconsin. Legal Action is a nonprofit legal aid law firm. We provide entirely free legal representation in civil, non-criminal court. We do a lot of work in eviction court. We do a lot of work in family court, consumer, public benefits, and employment law. We have 6 offices in the southern half of the state: Madison, Milwaukee, Racine, Green Bay, Oshkosh, and La Crosse. I'm based out of our Madison office, where I do work in Dane County, Rock County, and pretty much all the counties around Dane and Rock County. I do want to preface my remarks with the caveat that I'm here to speak only for informational purposes, and not to talk at all or advocate at all for any changes to the law or to join in any of the calls for action at the end of the call. I'm here simply to speak to my experience with eviction court, not only in Rock County, but throughout the state, and how this looks, practically speaking, for tenants facing eviction. Next slide. And I think it's important to keep in mind who gets evicted. Study after study, starting with Matt Desmond's work in Milwaukee several years ago in the book Evicted and his subsequent work, but also his subsequent work and other researchers' subsequent work throughout the country have shown that Black and Latinx tenants are far more disproportionately likely to be evicted than their white counterparts. Sometimes that rate is as high as 2 or 3 times more likely. This is particularly true with women of color, who are even more likely than male people of color to have evictions filed against them, and even far more likely to have multiple eviction actions filed against them by the same landlord. These numbers hold true for what we see at Legal Action in terms of who's coming into court in eviction court in Rock County, in Dane County, but the research has backed up what we've known for years, is that if you are a person of color, you are far more likely to be facing eviction, to be evicted, and have more eviction actions filed against you, sometimes by the very same landlord. Next slide. The eviction process in Wisconsin is a very quick one. I'm going to give a very brief overview of how that process works. It starts with a landlord giving a tenant a termination notice, a notice that terminates their tenancy and says they can't live there anymore. That notice can be as short as 5 days, it can be 14 days, it can be 28 days. The length of the notice depends on the type of lease the person has and the reason the tenant is being evicted. For the most common situation, non-payment of rent, the most common type of notice that landlords give is a 5-day notice. That notice gives the tenant 5 days to either pay the rent or move out. And if they don't pay the rent and they don't move out, the next step is a landlord can start an eviction action in small claims court. Once that eviction action is filed, some of you may have heard of something called CCAP. That stands for the Consolidated Court Automation Program. The technical name, correct name for it is WCCA, the Wisconsin Circuit Court Access Program. It's a website at the Wisconsin Court's website where you can do a search for somebody's name. And if they've had an eviction action filed against them, if they've been involved in almost any type of lawsuit, there's a public record created of that, because a court filing is a public record. When somebody starts a lawsuit, the vast majority of lawsuits are public record, and Wisconsin, which has very strong open records laws, allows free and easy access to those records. So it's sometimes the case that tenants will find out about an eviction action before they get served with their court paperwork. Sometimes by having a friend or family member look them up and say, hey, I looked online and saw that there's this eviction action filed against you. The next step in the process is there's an initial court date called a return date before a court commissioner. These hearings are not on the record. There's not a court reporter there. They're held before a court commissioner who is kind of like a mini judge. They have a lot, but not quite all the same powers that a circuit court judge does. Those return dates are usually held about 2 to 4 weeks after the case is filed. Right now, due to the pandemic, Rock County, as most counties are doing, are handling those return dates remotely by Zoom. Tenants are given a call-in number to call in. They do those in Rock County on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock. That's when the cattle call is for all the eviction filings for that week. In normal times, when things are done in person in Rock County, the trial date, the date that a judge would decide whether you would be evicted, would happen the same day as your return date. Back when the courts were doing these in person, they would do these at 8 o'clock on Friday morning, and you'd have to show up at 8 o'clock on Friday morning, and if you were a few minutes late, you could have a default judgment, an automatic win for your landlord granted against you. And in normal times, they would tell you that you need to then go see a judge later that morning to decide whether or not an eviction should be granted. That practice in Rock County is unique and different than the practice in the vast majority of other counties in Wisconsin. The vast majority of other counties, this is true for both large counties like Milwaukee and Dane, but also for smaller counties like Dodd, Jefferson, counties that are smaller than Rock County, is that after that return date, when a tenant shows up to contest their eviction, they'll get a second court date scheduled out before a judge a week or 2 or 3 down the road. So they won't be having to go into court that day and have a judge decide whether or not they should be evicted. You do have a right to request a jury trial in an eviction case, but that does not happen very often. It is very much a small minority of cases that go to a jury trial. Most cases are decided by a judge. Except for Rock County, most cases are decided by a judge at a later date. If the judge decides in the landlord's favor and eviction is granted, the judge signs what's called a writ of restitution. That's the fancy legal name for the document that goes to the sheriff's department, which, as we saw in the video at the top of the hour, is how the tenant is actually removed from their apartment. Is the sheriff's department will literally come out and remove the person from their apartment. So this whole process that I've described can happen in as few as a few short weeks. It's one of the most consequential interactions our citizens can have with the court system, because the end result could be a judge ordering the sheriff's department to remove somebody from their home, physically if necessary. That consequence is one of the most dramatic and traumatic experiences citizens can have with the court system. Yet this is one of the quickest processes in the entire court system. Next slide. There's a lot of myths that tenants have about evictions. I've been practicing for over 20 years. I hear these all the time. People think, well, it's Wisconsin, it's January, and it's minus 20 degrees out. I can't possibly be evicted in the middle of the winter. People can be evicted at any time, no matter how cold it is out. There is no limits on when an eviction action can be filed or when somebody can be evicted. People also think sometimes, oh, this is such a serious consequence of me being removed from my home. I must have the right to have an attorney in an eviction case. There's no right to have an attorney appointed for you in an eviction case. Some municipalities, New York, San Francisco, Baltimore, some other municipalities, and in some states are considering establishing a right to counsel in eviction cases, because the consequence of the end result is so dire that it is just as bad as other cases as where you have the right to have an attorney appointed for you. The most common situation is in criminal law. If you can't afford an attorney and the state is charging you with a crime, you have the right to a court-appointed attorney. You don't have that right in an eviction case, even though the end result, being removed from your home, is the same dramatic consequence as being incarcerated. It's also a myth that it's a slow process. It's not. As I just outlined, it can happen as short as a few short weeks. There's also a common misconception out there that maybe there's some limit on how much a landlord can raise somebody's rent. There's no rent control. There are no rent limits in the state of Wisconsin. Landlords are free to raise rent as much and as often as they want, subject to the terms of somebody's lease. Most people have leases that last for a year, but at the end of that year, a landlord is free to raise the rent, free to refuse to renew that person's lease. They're free to do what they want. For tenants who have a month-to-month lease, landlords can and sometimes do raise the rent every single month if they want to. Next slide. Part of why this is going on is that there have been dramatic changes to the law in Wisconsin in the last 10 years. In 4 legislative sessions, beginning in 2012, and then the next 3 biennial legislative sessions, the Wisconsin legislature has dramatically changed landlord-tenant law and changed it to the detriment of tenants. Eviction actions now are required to happen quicker. I had mentioned before about how quickly things happen. The court is required to schedule a trial within 30 days of that initial court date. So if you're in court, you're going to have a trial date no later than 30 days out, unless the court finds that there's some good reason to give you more time, or everybody agrees that there should be more time. Another big change to the law is that municipalities are prohibited from regulating landlords, from regulating rent increases, or for putting any sort of local bans on eviction. This was a big change in the law. In many municipalities, before the law changed, municipalities can and did place limits on, for example, how far back a landlord could look at somebody's rental history or criminal history, or how often or how frequently they could increase rent, how much they could charge for security deposits, restrictions on inspection of apartments, those sorts of things. With the changes in the law a few years ago, municipalities were prohibited, banned from putting those sort of local controls on landlords. There was many local controls in Madison and Dane County, up in Wausau, some other municipalities that were struck down as the result of the change in state law. Another big change is that the ability of tenants to contest evictions has now been weakened. Now, if you want to contest your eviction, you need to state a valid legal basis for contesting the eviction. It used to be that you could show up at your return date. The court commissioner would ask you, the tenant, whether they're contesting the eviction. The tenant would say, yes, I'm contesting the eviction. I want a trial date before a judge. And they would be given that trial date. Now the tenant has to state a valid legal basis to challenge the eviction. When most tenants don't have attorneys, they don't know what the magic words are to say to a court commissioner to challenge their eviction. So it's entirely possible for somebody to have a valid legal defense to an eviction, but if they don't state things properly before the court commissioner at that first return date, they may never see a judge. They may get evicted by a court commissioner at that return date. So all of these changes in the law have made things much harder for tenants. These changes in the law, for those of you who are familiar with the book Evicted, all came after Matt Desmond did his work in that book and did his research in that book. So these are all much drastic changes that have happened since the law has changed. Next slide. It's also important to keep in mind what we call the scarlet E that tenants get branded with when an eviction action is filed. Once an eviction action is filed, there can be a record of that eviction which lasts for 20 years or more. And as I mentioned, recent changes in the law have prohibited municipalities from regulating what landlords can use to screen tenants. So right now, it's completely legal in Wisconsin for a landlord to refuse to rent to someone because an eviction action was filed, regardless of whether or not the landlord had a valid claim for eviction, regardless of the result of the case. As Mike pointed out, most eviction cases don't end with the sheriff at somebody's door removing the tenant. That only happens in somewhere between 5 to 20% of eviction cases. Most eviction cases don't end that way. Most eviction cases end with the landlord and tenant amicably working things out. They come to an agreement in cases of rent, work out an agreement to pay the back rent, and the tenant gets to stay there. Sometimes they work out agreements where the tenant agrees that they're going to move out. Sometimes courts throw out eviction actions. They find that the landlord should never have brought the action and dismiss the case. Sometimes landlords voluntarily dismiss a case. Sometimes landlords don't bother to show up in court and the court dismisses the case. But for all of those cases, regardless of the outcome of the case, it is completely legal for landlords to refuse to rent to someone because of that eviction filing. Ironically, one of the hardest times for a tenant to find housing is sometimes the time when both the landlord and the tenant want to move. It's when there's an eviction action filed. The tenant doesn't want to stay there. The landlord wants the tenant out. That's why they filed the eviction action. But because this eviction action is filed, because it hasn't been resolved, because it's hanging open out there, that's sometimes the hardest time for a tenant to find a place to live. Because when they go to apply for housing, prospective landlords are going to see that, and it is completely legal for landlords to refuse to rent to that person, regardless of what's going on with the eviction case. It is possible for tenants to file motions with courts to ask the judges seal their name from the court file. So the way that this shows up, when somebody's name is filed, it will show up as the name of the landlord versus party sealed by Judge Dillon or Judge so-and-so or Commissioner Meyer, whoever signs the order sealing things. But in order to do that, you really need an attorney to be able to know that you can even, number one, do that, and number two, know what paperwork you need to file in order to do that. When we as attorneys file these motions, those are usually multi-page motions with briefs, with affidavits. That's not something that a tenant who doesn't have representation can do on their own. So there are some workarounds to trying to seal people's names from the court record so that that eviction case doesn't show up. But that only happens in a very small minority of cases. I see somebody in the comments said that somebody said that in Rock County, if tenants say contested, it goes to a judge. In my experience, that does happen sometimes, but I have seen on more than one occasion when a tenant doesn't say the right words, the commissioner granting a judgment of eviction, even when they may have a valid legal defense, but they didn't say the right words, then they won't get a hearing before a judge. I see somebody who asked a question about whether or not things are different for a land contract versus a rental agreement. The legal answer is it depends on what the land contract says. Sometimes it may be the same, sometimes not. I see somebody else commented that landlord screening for evictions is 100% preventable by tenants moving out prior to the 5-day notice expiring. That's absolutely correct. If somebody moves out, you try moving out within 5 days after getting a notice. It's incredibly difficult to up and move, uproot your entire family and move out in less than a week. I couldn't do that. I don't think most of us on this call could do that if they wanted to. I think I've reached the end of my presentation, so I'll turn it back over to Tammie and our next presenter. And if folks have other questions, we'll take those at the end of things as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Korey. We all know that where you live, work, and play can impact your health. And for those experiencing eviction, all too often you're seeing negative health outcomes. With us tonight is one of our service providers, one of our local homeless experts, to talk to us about trauma, health, and families facing eviction. Next, we'll have Jessica Locher, Executive Director of ECHO.
Hi, everyone. We have heard some impactful information tonight about evictions. And as Tammie stated, I'll be sharing some information with you about youth homelessness, adverse childhood experiences, and some client stories who have faced eviction. Next slide, please. The McKinney-Vento Act defines homeless children and youth as individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. The term includes children and youth who are sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, sometimes referred to as doubled up, living in a motel, hotels, trailer parks, or camping grounds due to lacking of alternative adequate accommodations. Also living in emergency or transitional shelters, abandoned in hospitals, or awaiting foster care placement. It also includes children and youth who have a primary nighttime residence that is a public or private place not designed for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings. Children and youth who are living in cars, parks, public places, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings. And it also includes migratory children who qualify as homeless because they are living in circumstances described previously. The next slide is a breakdown of the 2 largest school districts in Rock County with their homeless statistics for the current school year through the end of February 2021. The school district of Beloit had 312 children who met this definition of McKinney-Vento homelessness. 112 of them were African American, 57 were Hispanic, 43 had 2 or more races listed, and 100 were white. The school district of Janesville had 203 students that qualified for McKinney-Vento homelessness. 54 were Black, 37 are Hispanic, 29 are mixed race, and 3 are Asian, and 80 are white. The next slide states that Adverse childhood experiences are described as traumatic experiences in a person's life occurring before the age of 18 that the person remembers as an adult. For those of you who don't know, adverse childhood experiences come in many forms, from physical and mental abuse to neglect and household dysfunction. In 1998, CDC Kaiser Permanente published a groundbreaking study that investigated the impacts of ACEs on physical and mental health problems in over 17,000 adults. During the study, the adults were given a survey asking them about 10 different types of adverse childhood experiences, and if they have experienced them prior to the age of 18. The study showed a direct correlation between adverse childhood experiences and future health complications. The next slide goes over 3 types of ACEs. Abuse, which includes physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Neglect, which is physical and emotional. Or household dysfunction, which includes mental illness, mothers treated violently, divorce, incarcerated relatives, and substance abuse. The next slide, please. The CDC Kaiser ACE study found that adults with an ACE score of 4 or more were at significantly greater risk for many behavioral, physical, and mental health issues later in life. Some behavioral health issues that could be caused are smoking, alcohol abuse, lack of physical activity, drug abuse, and missing work, just to name a few. Some physical and mental health issues that could be caused by ACEs are severe obesity, depression, diabetes, suicide attempts, higher risk of STDs, chronic lung disease, stroke, cancer, and heart disease, just to name a few. Next slide, please. ACEs can get under our skin, impacting health through toxic stress. Not all stress is bad. Some stress is healthy and positive because it prepares us to respond to temporary challenges in our lives, such as running a race, public speaking tonight, or starting a new job. Our stress response activates and then quickly returns to a baseline. More intense or longer lasting stressors can be tolerable if we have support systems in our lives to help us cope. If we don't have those support systems, severe and frequent exposure to certain types of stress can cause a toxic effect of the body and brain. Some examples of a positive stress are maybe a first day of school or work. There's also tolerable stress, which is like the loss of a family member, but with the support buffers in place. And then an example of toxic stress is witnessing a domestic violence in the home or chronic neglect. It is the toxic stress that, when not properly addressed and reduced, can lead to long-term behavior issues, health complications, and diseases that are caused by ACEs. The higher your ACE score, the greater chance you'll have experiencing homelessness, as the slide in front of you states. Next slide, please. Some ways to prevent toxic stress, especially for our youth, because this is really our main point right here about talking about ACEs. We want to make sure that we're providing nurturing, safe, and stable environments, help children learn to cope with adversity, and reduce a child's ACE exposures. ACEs work through experiences, not just exposures. Exposure alone does not necessarily mean a child is affected. If the ACE is prevented from causing toxic stress, the harm should not occur. With a caring and nurturing environment, we can build children with resilience to protect them from ACEs. Next slide, please. Resilience. Our brains are immensely malleable, and we can totally change the impacts of ACEs with our youth, especially if we focus on these 7 core ideas to help develop and foster resilience in children. 1, being competence, building their understanding of their skills. 2, confidence, helping kids grow a true belief in their own abilities. 3, connection, connecting children with other people, schools, and communities to further build their support system. 4, character, helping them comprehend a clear sense of right and wrong and teaching them moral values. 5, contribution, offering children a chance to contribute to the well-being of others. They learn that giving service feels good, then feel more comfortable in asking for help as well. 6, coping, discovering a variety of healthy coping strategies to prevent children from dangerous quick fixes to stress. 7, control, teaching children to make decisions on their own so they can experience a sense of control. Please remember these 7 core ideas are super important so we don't re-traumatize and create more adverse childhood experiences, especially during eviction and homelessness. Next slide, please. I'm now going to share a few stories of families that were assisted by ECHO and House of Mercy who were homeless due to eviction or were prevented from homelessness by receiving prevention rent assistance. One ECHO client was in a household and he left his job in June due to COVID-19. He did not want to bring COVID-19 home to one of their sick children and their newborn. His partner also needed his assistance to take care of the sick child and the newborn. The husband later then found a new job that started at the end of July. Family was living off of their stimulus money and tax returns. They received an eviction notice indicating they needed to pay the rent that they fell behind on. ECHO was able to assist with the remaining balance of their current month's rent. And when we did their 6-month follow-up, after we assisted them, they were still in their apartment and current on their rent. Another ECHO client was struggling with her health and was unable to work due to her medical conditionings worsening. Doctors told her she could not return to work until she was fully healed. Unfortunately, this caused her and her family to get behind on their rent. They then received an eviction notice. ECHO was able to assist them with 2 months of rent, which saved their family of 4 from being evicted from their residence, and they are still in their home. Another ECHO client got laid off from her job because she had injured her back while working as a CNA. She was put on light duty for work, but then was later let go. She filed for unemployment, but due to COVID-19, there was a delay in receiving her benefits. This then caused her to be unable to pay her September rent. She received a 5-day eviction notice from her landlord to either pay the rent or vacate the premises. ECHO paid her September rent, which saved her and her 3 children from being evicted. A House of Mercy story. Kim and Tracy met while residents of a Walworth County shelter. Once they reached their exit date, they began to live in Tracy's car. Both ladies were burdened with evictions and were unable to find adequate housing due to their evictions and limited income. Kim is a single mother who voluntarily separated from her children in order for them to have a stable home while she was homeless. Kim struggled with the separation, but kept in contact with them daily. She often stated that her past mistakes have a way of creeping up at her at the right time. She stated that finding a landlord who would give her another chance is one of the most difficult processes she's ever experienced. She stated that she would be rejected at the word eviction, no matter how honest she was about the reason for those evictions. Tracy is a single mother who became homeless after a confrontation with a roommate and decided to leave. She also had past evictions with low income barriers. She had adult children that she was unable to live with. When they found themselves living in the car, they were accepted into House of Mercy. There, they received case management and information that assisted them in their housing search. They decided to pool their income and find housing together. They ran into many barriers such as low credit scores, non-refundable application fees, and limited income only to get rejected due to past evictions. With the assistance of House of Mercy, the ladies were able to find a 2-bedroom apartment and moved in late November. Another House of Mercy story. Jack and Katie and their child were victims of a mobile home fire in July 2020, which they lost everything. During the beginning, Red Cross stepped in, provided shelter along with family and friends. The family found themselves running out of options when they were accepted into House of Mercy. As they actively searched for housing, the barriers of a recent eviction hindered their search. Even though Jack did not have an eviction, they were not accepted due to Katie's rental history. She stated that no one would understand the only reason that she received an eviction was due to the fire. Jack was also fighting another battle with his unemployment. He stated even if he found a home, he would not be able to support his family due to his recent job losses due to COVID-19 and the slow process of unemployment. Jack finally received a large amount of back pay from unemployment, and the couple was able to put down a payment on another home. Those are just 5 examples of the many households, ECHO, House of Mercy, Community Action, and many other agencies here in our community work with of individuals and families who are facing eviction or have become homeless because of eviction. Thank you tonight for listening to me, and I hope you learned a lot.
Thank you, Jessica. So we've got a lot of good questions coming in the chat box. Please get those questions in and we will get to all of them or as many of them as we can tonight. And with that, we will ask Katie Udell to join us again. Katie is again a member of the Planning Committee and a member of the Rock County Diversity Action Team to talk with us about what can we do, how can we help. Katie.
Thank you. So it's been mentioned tonight already. If you haven't read the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond, highly recommended. That book is based on his research in Milwaukee. And evictionlab.org, and then the forthcoming website that Michael spoke about tonight that will be Wisconsin specific. You can learn more about tenant rights at this website. And by the way, all of these links and information has been shared on the Diversity Action Team Facebook page. So if you would like the links there, you can get it right on Facebook. Give if you can. Use that stimulus money if you're able to by donating to one of the many great organizations that are working to help people in our community. The ECHO has an eviction prevention program. House of Mercy does as well. The Wisconsin Equal Justice Fund is a Wisconsin-based legal assistance fund. Community Action, YWCA of Rock County, and the United Way eviction prevention programs, among many others that also are in our community that are doing good. Another thing is take political action. Ask the Rock County Board to review how eviction filings are processed in Rock County Circuit Court. The courts, the Rock County courts had half the amount of Dane County eviction filings, but more eviction judgments. Sorry, people are drawing on the screen. Please don't do that. Also ask the Rock County Board to invest in legal aid services if not already done, and or increase budget investment in upcoming budgets. And then for youth, look at what's available to help out in your local community, especially teens, and the links that we shared above. The local school district homeless liaisons are Robin and Carrie, and these are the phone numbers. Again, there's actually youth resources based on the book Evicted at this website. So for teachers and parents and people that work with youth, this would be a great resource. And then library has many great nonfiction and fiction books. Here are a couple fiction examples that talk about families experiencing homelessness. Practice service learning and share your voice and encourage others to do the same. Again, these links will be on the Facebook page. And a special thank you to these wonderful people that helped develop and put this program together.
Huh?
Let me just mute somebody here. Tammie King Johnson, our moderator, Michael Basford, Korey Lundin, and Allison Creekmuir, Jessica Locher, Kelly Bedessem, Tia Johnson, Jean Carfora, and me. Thank you for attending. This recording of this program will be posted on the Hedberg Public Library YouTube channel, so look for that. Check the Diversity Action Team website or the partner Facebook pages for upcoming events and registration. On April 26th will be the next Courageous Conversations, and the next Diversity Action Team program at 6:30 will be Nervous Stomachs, Breakdowns in Health and Food Systems. And with that, I'll pass it off to Tammie.
Thank you, Katie. We encourage everyone to please take advantage of the resources and find out a way that you can help to address this pressing issue in our community. So now to get to some of the great questions that came through the chat box. And so the first question is there something driving these differences in evictions between Dane and Rock County? And what about the differences between Beloit and Janesville? Do you have any data that can help make that assessment? Why don't we ask Michael Basford from the Interagency Council on Homelessness to address that one first, and then maybe Korey. Michael.
So what I provided for you this evening was the what, and that is the data of just how many eviction filings and how many eviction judgments there have been. The question that you're asking is why, and that I don't have an answer for. As we continue to dive into this, hopefully we will start getting the answers to the why questions. But unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that one. Sorry.
Thank you. Korey, any thoughts?
I don't have any good answers either, only a bunch of suppositions. And I can't speak specifically to the disparity in Rock County, but one of the things I noticed in Mike's numbers is that there are not many evictions granted in Milwaukee County. One of the things that is unique in Milwaukee County is my firm has started an eviction defense project, which works with volunteer lawyers. We've had this up and running for many years now. We don't, there's no right to counsel in eviction cases, but we do try and provide attorneys to as many people as possible in eviction court in Milwaukee. So I do suspect that in Milwaukee County, there's a higher percentage of tenants who are receiving representation than in Rock County or in Dane County. I suspect those numbers are true if we look at Dane County and Rock County, that there are more tenants receiving representation in Dane County than in.
And if I may, further to Korey's point, in Dane County, renters in Dane County are served by the Tenant Resource Center, which has been around for about 30 years now, and they provide they provide as part of their services mediation between landlords and tenants that have led to a number of evictions not going all the way to judgment. So that I can't say that for certain, but that's a correlation that can't exactly be ignored.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Korey. I'm going to bounce around here and look at some of our other questions. Let's see here. Do we know, is the eviction process the same for residents of trailer parks?
The process that I described, that eviction process, is the same. Mobile home park, trailer park, people who own mobile homes in trailer parks do have some more rights than regular residential tenants in that they are required to have a 1-year lease. The notice that a landlord will give, the owner of a mobile home park will give the mobile home park owner, is usually longer than any of the notices that a residential rental tenant will receive. So there are some slight differences, but that process I described, that court process, that's the same for mobile home park owners as it is for residential rental tenants. The longer periods of time for mobile home park or people who own mobile homes comes at the beginning of the case before the eviction action.
Thank you, Korey. Excellent question. Another question from Jennifer with the Janesville Housing Services. This question is for Michael. Michael, do you know if the eviction filings and judgments for Rock County compared to other communities were similar pre-pandemic, i.e. 2019?
I can't answer that question right now, but when the website goes live, you'll be able to see for yourself the answer to that question, and that's something I can also then I could look up and then share with you so that you can further on share with the rest of this community. Our data will not be going back any further than 2019. This is kind of a more of a going into the future sort of thing, and for a wide variety of reasons, we can't go back further than 2019.
Thank you, Michael. Let's see, a lot of good questions here, folks. Some long comments, so you can also read the open comments. Next question, how are these circumstances the same or different for those whose residency is under the terms of a land contract rather than a rental agreement?
Generally speaking, they're very similar. Most people who have land contracts, it's an agreement. A land contract, for those who don't know, is an agreement to enter into an offer to purchase a property later on. And then the rent that is paid along the way will usually be included in the down payment when the property is purchased. But until that happens, and until the tenant purchases the property and becomes a homeowner, they are a tenant. So there can be some differences between the lease terms of a land contract, but for the most part, it's almost identical to every other lease that I see. There are some exceptions to that, but the process is almost always the same. The types of notice is almost always the same. The process is almost identical.
Thank you. Question in the chat, good question. Will these slides be available later? I do believe they will be available on the Diversity Action Team website. All right, here's a comment. ECHO is a lifesaver for tenants in Rock County. They have programs already set up for 1 month's rent assistance and rapid rehousing. What they'd be able to do with 5 times the funding would be incredible in stemming the negative effects of evictions. Jessica, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I would just like to thank thank you for that comment. We are very proud of the program that we've been running here at ECHO with our rent assistance program and our rapid rehousing programs. We are extremely lucky. Most of those programs are funded by federal, state, and city grants. We do have some private donations that do allow us to provide assistance also, but the majority of that funding comes from federal, state, and city grants. So if you definitely want to see that program continue, which we have about a 65 to 70% rate at 6-month follow-ups of tenants still being in their units, especially considering most of our clients are extremely low income. That is a very good success rate in our opinion. So we definitely welcome any additional donations to help fund that program. We are on average, probably paying anywhere between 30 to 50 months of rent each month. So it is a program that is much needed here in Rock County.
Thank you, Jessica. And a reminder, there are multiple agencies providing similar services, eviction assistance and prevention, ECHO, Community Action, YWCA, Salvation Army. And so again, pay attention to the resources that were provided, and those organizations always are also seeking funding. Here's another good question. Can anybody talk a little bit more about the racial disparities in evictions? Why are Black and brown people more likely to be evicted in Rock County?
I can't speak specifically to Rock County, but I can talk in general about why we think that is. Underpinning our entire housing system and our entire housing network is a whole series of laws stretching back decades that have created structural racism and structural segregation. Madison and Milwaukee are 2 of the most segregated cities in the entire nation, more segregated than almost anywhere in the Deep South. That's been true for a very long time. The history of that is an entirely other seminar, but I think it's important to keep in mind that it wasn't that long ago, and sometimes within the lifetimes of people on this call, that it was entirely legal to refuse to rent to somebody because of the color of their skin. The laws that stopped that from happening didn't go into place until the 1960s. Madison was the first place to pass that in 1963. The Federal Fair Housing Act came in 1968. Before that, in many municipalities, it was completely legal for people to refuse to rent to you because of the color of the skin or what you looked like. Redlining that happened in the 20s or 30s is another thing that gave way to some of the segregation we see in our larger cities, where the companies that were lenders created maps. They're called red line maps because the places that were considered the quote unquote bad areas of town were colored red. Good areas were green, placed in the middle were yellow and blue. Those red places were not coincidentally usually places where people of color lived. And that's what, if you read the comments to red line maps, that's exactly what they say. They don't make any secret about it. They say, that's where the people of color live. They didn't use those terms back then, but that's what they say. It's also important that in many municipalities, it wasn't that long ago that it was completely legal to have restrictive covenants. What a restrictive covenant is something that would prohibit you from selling a house to somebody who isn't white. Those laws didn't get struck down until the 40s. They still exist in some places, in some old contracts. You can't enforce them anymore, but they still exist sometimes. But those lingering effects, those all happened within some of our lifetimes. Those all have a lingering effect on how our cities get built, how they look, who lives there, and where people live. So that's a very kind of broad answer to things, but it's a broad answer because it isn't one thing that caused this. It's a lot of things going back decades.
Thank you, Korey. Another good question. We are hearing that people are getting evicted currently despite the CDC eviction moratorium. How and why is that happening? Michael.
Well, the moratorium in and of itself is only for eviction filings, is supposed to be for eviction filings that are rent payment related. So anecdotally, what I've heard over the last year is that when we've had moratoria out there, that landlords have been filing evictions for non-payment reasons. In a lot of instances where something would happen where a landlord would let it slide or not know about it, suddenly becomes very, very enforceable when you can't evict somebody who can't pay their rent because they lost their job in the economic downturn. So, and it's not something we can exactly measure, but I've certainly heard enough about that to know that is one thing. Also, the CDC's moratorium has been criticized as being something that is not entirely robust. So, and Korey, I think, may be able to speak further to this. But because of it, there have been evictions happening as a result, despite the moratorium.
That's true, Mike. The CDC moratorium, nothing about it is automatic. In order for a tenant to be covered under the moratorium, they have to sign a document attesting to a number of things, such as their income, that they're unable to pay rent, that they've used their best efforts to apply for government, to deliver that to their landlord. So it only covers tenants that are falling behind on rent and are being evicted for non-payment of rent. There's a gray area in the law, and I think somebody may have just commented on this, is that it's not clear under the CDC moratorium whether or not people who are on a month-to-month lease and are given a 28-day notice, which a landlord can give for no reason at all. Some judges have held that the CDC moratorium applies to those cases. Some have held that it doesn't. So I can tell you, because I just had to look this up for preparing for my calendar for next week. Next week in Dane County, there's 34 cases on the docket for next Tuesday's return date. Evictions are happening in Wisconsin. They're continuing to happen, in spite of the moratorium, because there are a lot of reasons that landlords are still legally able to file evictions even in spite of the moratorium. So it's not that these eviction actions that are being filed are illegal or incorrect. A very small percentage of them probably are, but most of them are legal because the CDC moratorium is not broad.
Thank you. So we have another land contract question. Any of the speakers know if evictions from land contracts are tracked as a distinct subset? And if so, where might we find that information?
They are not. The only way that I would know to get that data would be if somebody actually goes down to the courthouse and looks through every eviction filing, like literally looks through the paperwork to see whether or not it involves a land contract. There's no code in the court system that tracks those separately or treats them differently. That's the only way I would be aware.
Thank you. And Korey, can you clarify, do month-to-month leases with a 28-day notice qualify or not under the CDC declaration?
If the tenant is behind, in my opinion, if the tenant is behind in rent and they get a 28-day notice, and the 28-day notice doesn't give any other reason for the termination of tenancy, and the tenant has signed the CDC declaration, in my opinion, they are covered. That is just my opinion. Some judges have agreed with me on that. Some judges have not. So, and there's no guiding authority from the Court of Appeals or Wisconsin Supreme Court to tell judges otherwise. So it depends on which judge you get. Some judges will think it does, some will think it doesn't.
Thank you, Korey. Thank you, Lynn, for patiently waiting. Her question is there any legislation on lowering the lengthy record of evictions being worked on?
There is currently none before the, excuse me, before the legislature. I do know that there are conversations with amongst legislators about having that be part of some reforms that may be announced. But I can't speak for the legislature or the legislators. That may be a question that a resident of Rock County may ask, Senator Ringand or Representative Spicer or I can't remember the other ones that represent Rock County, but certainly you should ask your representative and your senator about that.
Okay. Next question, maybe Jessica, you could take this one. Are there income guidelines for getting eviction rent assistance?
Yes, so depending on funding sources that are available, there are income guidelines. Most of the grants out there are 80% county median income or less. If you give me 1 second, I can pull up what those numbers are for you.
Jessica, while you're looking for that, we'll come back to you. We'll take one more question and we'll circle back.
Okay.
Carol's question, who or where was the decision made about having the return date and the trial on the same day? How can that be changed? Korey, could you respond?
I can't speak to the who made that decision because I don't honestly know. I can't speak to the where. It's found in Rock County's local court rules. Judge Dillon is the chief judge of Rock County right now, I believe. So the circuit court judges can set local rules so long as they don't contradict state law. So there's nothing illegal or in contradiction of state law with Rock County's local rules that require the trial date on the same day as the return date. But if those local rules were to be changed, that would be something directed to the circuit court judges. They have the power and ability to change those local rules if they want to.
Thank you, Korey. Jessica, income guidelines.
Okay, so for a household of 4, 80% county median income, this is gross annual income, is no more than $56,650. So that is one area. If you're receiving CDBG funding for household of 4, you have to be under $42,480. This is annual income before anything is taken out, so taxes, insurance. Majority of our clients though fit in the 30% county median income. And so for household of 4, that is $26,200 a year. That is very little income for four people. But yes, majority of the grants are 80% or less county median income.
Thank you. Got a few more questions to go, and we've got about 10 minutes left, folks. So if you have questions, please quickly get those into the chat. If you'd like to ask anonymously, please send the question directly to Tammie King-Johnson. Next question is for Michael. What is the Interagency Council on Homelessness doing to address these staggering numbers of evictions in Wisconsin?
Well, several things that that we're working on right now. One of the what is really happening here in Madison that's taking up a lot of time and energy is the budget that the governor released back in February. It included, among that, the largest investment in fighting homelessness in Wisconsin history. And that includes several things that would help people in eviction, an increase in homelessness prevention funding. That we know that once the federal government funds the fire hose of money that's coming from Washington, once that gets done, there's still going to be the need for homelessness prevention. And we're looking to double funding for that. We're looking to make substantial investments in affordable housing development. That is one thing that will certainly affect the market, and in a good way. And we're also looking at a couple of investments in legal aid. One being $2 million for legal aid that is per fiscal year for legal aid for indigent people, so that they can get representation. And that includes in eviction courts as well. And we're also, Korey had mentioned right to counsel, and that is something that we're in the process of exploring to see how we can make that a reality in Wisconsin as well.
Thank you, Michael. Another question, it looks like this one goes to you also, Michael. What is happening at the state level to address these racial disparities in eviction?
Well, Korey had said quite a bit about it earlier, and I completely agree with a lot of the things he said about how we got here. And here, in terms of homelessness, there is a staggering disparity in the homelessness systems and housing markets. And really, there's a lot of data that backs it up, but the one top line is that the state of Wisconsin is a state that is the population's 86% white, but white people make up only 49% of those who are receiving homelessness services in the state. And so increasing opportunities and housing opportunities for certain. It is something that we're looking at right now. We're in the process of rewriting, updating the Hand in a Home statewide plan to fight homelessness. We had inherited it from the previous administration, but there's a lot in it that is to be recommended. But there's scant little mention or acknowledgement of how racial disparities and inequities in the homelessness system and the housing markets have had the effects that we are now seeing in the data. And so we've come to the point that as part of that, we've stood up a work group that is dedicated toward addressing racial equity issues in the homelessness and systems in the housing markets. We're going to create I'm looking forward to seeing a large number of recommendations being made, and it's also good to point out that racial equity work group is chaired by Tammie. So, and she's doing very good work.
Thank you for that, Michael. And I welcome recommendations, folks that are concerned about the racial disparities and homelessness, to provide direct feedback to me as it relates to what we might incorporate into that state plan. I'll be putting my email in the chat box and you can connect with me after the program. So I think we've got time for at least one more question. And this is a good one from Carol Wickersham, and we'll ask Jessica Locher to respond. What do you on the front line project will happen when the pandemic moratorium is lifted? What preparations are being made to address what is coming?
So luckily, there has been many opportunities through stimulus packages, COVID relief bills. There is a lot of funding coming through Department of Administration, our local cities to provide rent assistance. As Sean Ray pointed out, there right now is the WARA Rent Assistance Program, which covers 12 months of back rent payments along with 3 months future rent, and that is available through Community Action. If you know anybody who needs rent assistance, they can apply for that program through Community Action's website. They also do need to apply for the for the Energy Assistance Program to start that process. Also, we have here at ECHO plenty of federal funding right now to assist us with providing prevention assistance too for those that would not qualify for WARA or need further assistance, along with other agencies such as House of Mercy, Family Promise in Beloit, etc. There's plenty of places that they can try to find assistance, but the big bang for your punch of making sure that your rent is covered would be the Community Action's WARA program. But definitely you can call any of our agencies or dial 211 if you're in need of a listing of any agencies that provide rental assistance.
Thank you, Jessica. There is a comment in the chat that refers to a new project that we do want to highlight and thank the city of Janesville for bringing forward, that there is an affordable housing project that is currently taking applications in Janesville. The River Flats apartments are renting out. It looks like 1,200 two-bedroom apartments. I don't think it's quite that many. I think we've got Jennifer on the call still from the housing. Jennifer, do you want to respond to that? Nothing like being put on the spot. Maybe Jennifer's no longer with us.
Sorry, Tammie, I'm here just having a hard time getting unmuted.
Oh,
so yes, the River Flats Apartments is an affordable housing project mostly funded with tax credits. There is some city assistance in the project as well. Some community development block grant funds were in place to help them acquire the site, and some land was donated. But it's just going to make a little dent in what the need is for affordable housing in our community. There are 92 total units on the project. I believe all but 6 are 2 bedrooms and 6 are 3 bedrooms. River Flats is still accepting applications for people who are looking to locate there. They have an office on East Milwaukee Street where their information can be accessed online. And they should be starting to move people into that building in May. So I think that's a positive development for increasing supply of affordable housing, but we definitely need to see more of that here in Janesville.
Thank you, Jennifer. We do have one last question. Are all of the Section 8 projects built in the 1980s still affordable? Anyone is welcome to respond to that question.
There are still some project-based Section 8 housing in the Janesville, Beloit area. There's very little true public housing that is housing owned by the government. Most subsidized housing, not only in the Janesville, Beloit area, but in most of Wisconsin, falls into either tax credit, project-based Section 8, which is where somebody has a voucher that goes with the apartment complex. Traditional Section 8 housing is when somebody gets a voucher and then is able to use that voucher at private apartments. I can't speak to what things were like in the 80s and how it varies from now, only to say that whatever the amount of affordable housing there is right now, it's not enough.
Thank you, Korey. Absolutely not enough. And with that, folks, our evening comes to an end. I'd like to thank you and to thank the Rock County Diversity Action team for allowing me to moderate this conversation with so many wonderful community members tonight. Again, take a look at the chat. All of the resources are listed there. There's some contact information for myself and for Jessica. We'd like to thank again the partners of the Diversity Action Team, Hedberg Public Library, the YWCA, Community Action, the Beloit NAACP, and UW-Madison Division of Extension. We hope that we will see you at the next Diversity Action Team event, Courageous Conversations, on April 26th. Thank you all, and with that, good night.